so excited, Sarah, for you to be on this podcast, more specifically because we're getting into the holidays, and I know that this
Yes.
is the time where we have a lot of family dynamics. And so the topic today is much needed because what I start noticing is that people need more of this talk, like family dynamics. What do
hmm
I do around my family? I have anxiety around my family and other types of
Yes.
emotions. So I really appreciate you being here today. How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm very excited to be here. This is a topic that comes up every year around this time. And I think it's kind of a double whammy too, because you have also I was going to say election, but by the time this airs, that will have already gone. So
Okay.
that's a topic that comes up every year. So it's on a lot of people's minds right now.
Well, and even like and even though you mentioned the election, and even though it's done, it's set by the time it airs, it's been a stressful year. It really has been a stressful year
hmm
for a lot of people. There's a lot of uncertainty and a lot of even different types of family dynamics related to differing points of view. And so
Yes.
even you bringing that up, we can all resonate with if I have a different belief and someone else does, then it still makes that a little more challenging in how we navigate it. Um,
Yeah.
I have
Especially
a
in your
random,
family.
yeah, well,
hmm
you spend so much time with them,
Right.
you know, we spend so much time with them. Well, I'm curious though, before we really dive into the meat and potatoes of this, have you always wanted to be a therapist?
Oddly enough, yes, I have always wanted
Really?
to be a therapist. Yeah, I kind of learned from an early age that it was a skill set of mine to listen to people and make them feel comfortable, and I found that that was how I would draw people to myself. Which, of course, I learned that skill from my family growing up. That was my role, and so
Yeah.
I thought, wow, well, this is what I'm good at. And so, of course, I should use this. And then I took a detour because I worked for a nonprofit for 15 years, but went back to school when
Okay.
both of my kids were in school, went to grad school, and finally kind of like achieved the dream,
Yeah.
the counselor
That's
dream.
That's so interesting because I was just thinking earlier as I was gonna, ask you this. I was curious because I don't think I've ever really met a therapist who said, like, I've wanted to do this my entire life. I've had people say I'm great with people and navigating the home, like navigating
Mm-hmm.
how you're feeling at home. So I think that's really cool that you knew that you wanted to do this.
Yeah. I think it is rare, but what's also rare is that my 15-year-old daughter wants to be a therapist as
Wow.
well. So
Okay.
we'll see if that pans out. But
Well, she hears mom stories. you know.
that's true.
Well, and so as we're talking a little more about family dynamics, I wanted to ask how specifically in your view do family dynamics shape the way we respond to stress and anxiety in adulthood? What do you notice happen with your clients and expertise?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Family dynamics, I think, are the blueprint for all of our relational experiences, emotional experiences, everything we learn from them. And so we can't really help but be affected by our family dynamics, like what
Yeah.
is okay within the family, what's kind of talked about, what's allowed. Kids kind of get a sense of what's acceptable to their parents and what's not. And so what to hide versus what to talk about. So I think from the good to the bad, I mean, obviously
Yeah.
there can be really good things that we get from our families too, but then there can also be much harder things to navigate as an adult.
Yeah, I mean, and you're right, from that blueprint, that's really the first people that we learn from, and how to navigate. When you're working with clients more specifically, what are you noticing in kind of the roles that we tend to play within the home. Do you see more commonalities on what types of personality traits and even how it affects today as well?
That's a good question. And I think, gosh, there's so many different
Yeah, I'm
ones.
sure.
Ones that I see quite a bit are kids who, well, they're adults now, but when they were kids, maybe they had to be maybe an emotional support for one of the parents. Maybe one of
Okay.
the parents relied on them for emotional support. And so, then unfortunately, they the kid is so attuned with what the parent is thinking and feeling, they don't often pay attention to what they're thinking and feeling. And so as an adult, they tend to continue taking care of people and taking care of people because that's what they knew, and then kind of get to a point where they're like, oh my gosh, I'm completely burned out and I don't know what I think and what I feel. And so it's a kind of a process of
Mm,
trying to figure that out as an adult.
yeah.
That's just one
Would
thing. I mean,
that be
there are so many.
yes, I'm sure. Oh, geez, I'm sure. When that happens, do you see that primarily happening more so with women than men being more that caretaker in the home?
Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely. I
Okay.
see a lot of women who are just, they're so burned out. They're taking care of, if they have kids, they're taking care of their kids, they're taking care of their spouse, taking care of maybe parents still, and even friends. They've kind of taken on, like, people are happy to let them fill that role because it feels good to
Yes.
have somebody who would go to extremes and do for you. But then they're just very burnt out.
Yes. Yeah. You see quite a bit of that.
I do
And
see a lot of that.
yeah, I see that a lot in I was gonna say, I think it's primarily more so with that women caretaker, but like you said, it starts from
Hmm.
such a young age. And what do you usually recommend to women or men, the one-off
Yes,
men
definitely. It can
that
be with
that
men as well. Yeah.
yes. Yeah, I know a couple men that are very caretakers. Like I take care of everyone and they're just carrying such a load.
Yes,
So I know it can go both ways. I know
absolutely.
it's really common with women though. What do you usually not necessarily what you're taking them through, but what advice would you have for someone who's listening who may say, "Wow, this is me and I'm burnout and I'm just sick of taking care of everyone." But they're having a hard
Yeah.
time because it's such a habit to turn to
Yes,
other
very
people.
ingrained.
Yeah, what normally would you do or say to help them navigate through that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a challenge. And I think, well, first of
Yeah.
all, it's brave to kind of start asking those questions.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, for
I
sure.
think that it's just to kind of preface it, it can
Sure.
feel selfish to them. They can think,
Mm,
oh, if I'm not doing these things, I'm selfish. And so, kind of debunking some of those lies that it's selfish to think about yourself or to set up boundaries, that kind of thing. But then I usually the first thing I would say is just kind of like try to start tuning in and paying attention to what's going on with you, because oftentimes if we're so focused on everything and everyone around us, it's like I don't really know what I'm feeling, I don't know what I'm thinking, I don't know what's happening in my body. And so
mm,
usually kind of trying to start with that, just paying attention, whether it's taking a pause for a brief second every day, or if it's, maybe sometimes I'll give people some questions just to work on very simple things, just like when something happens and I'm feeling stressed, like, what am I thinking? What am I feeling? What's going on in my body? And just kind of starting to tune in to that.
yes. I never thought of that until you mentioned that correlation between, which is so true, being so focused on other people around you that you actually don't know what you're feeling. Would you say that this is what you see often in people who come to you and say, I'm feeling bad, but I don't know why? Or when you start unpacking emotions, they're not even really able to put names to it? Is that a similar type?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean,
Okay.
I would say that, you don't have to even have the background that I described of taking care of a parent. It's very much, sometimes we learn in families like some emotions are safe to express and some are not. A lot of families are really okay if you're happy and joyful, but some, if you start to get sad or angry, that doesn't feel as good. And so that is shut down. And so as a kid, you kind of learn to tuck that away. And then
Yes.
as an adult, you, obviously we all have a range of emotions, but you don't pay attention to it. You're not tuned into it. So it can be very challenging to even know what you are feeling. I have a
Yes.
feelings wheel pillow in my office. It's got like
Oh, you have
60
a
different
pillow?
emotions. And so it's like, yeah, like, oh, I'm feeling jealous or I'm feeling frustrated or I'm
Yes.
feeling, even things that, yeah, kind of, yeah, things that you might think are simple. It's not simple. It's not easy for people.
No, yeah, I've heard of the feelings wheel. I actually had a feelings wheel keychain for a while
Oh yeah.
on a little
It's
keychain.
nice. Yeah.
But it's important to understand what you're feeling. You're right, because we don't know what to change until we're aware of the things that we need to change in our life.
Hmm.
And there's so much related to even going home for Thanksgiving and Christmas and holidays for
Yes.
people. It's like, and so what I hear a lot, Sarah, and I'm really curious what you have to say about this, is I hear a lot of people, and they'll either come into me or just friends or family I'm talking to, they'll be like, man, right when I get in a room with so and so, I feel so anxious and I feel so
Mm-hmm.
triggered. And I'd love to hear your perspective on this and just what you guide people through, or really we know where that's coming from. There's some type of dynamic there that's causing
Yes.
friction.
Yeah.
But yeah, what do you think about that when people come to you with this?
Yeah. That's tough. And I think, you know, whether it's a family or friend, everybody's experienced that. Some people just raise the anxiety or, trigger you in certain ways. I mean, I've certainly experienced it myself. And so um, I think that a lot of times I went to a therapist myself years ago, and the
Mhm.
thing that she said over and over was awareness breeds change. And so, kind of, if you know that it's a problem, that you're going to be in the room with this person, then maybe after maybe after you're home, you're feeling in a safe place, to just kind of get by yourself and think about, again, just building the awareness of what was going on. And
Yes.
then as far as my work with somebody, I would really want to explore what's the history with this person, like
Mm.
how, what's the earliest that you remember feeling this way with them, and kind of even thinking about, if it's a family member and you were a child, what what was the dynamic there? Were they critical of you? Were they, did you feel like you had to be a certain way, kind of like be perfect or put on some type of an act, or, was there some sort of abuse? I mean,
Mhm.
what was the dynamic? And there doesn't have to be abuse for you to feel anxious with a person. Obviously, there's so many reasons why that can develop.
Yeah, I mean, even you had mentioned the critical, and that reminds me
Hmm.
of what you said earlier when you said, there could even be a happy home where we
Hmm.
can't be sad because we're happy. It's almost this toxic family
Yes.
positivity. Like, no cry, we got to put, because the other thing that I've seen or witnessed as well is families and individuals who have to put on that facade of perfection. They're either their
Hmm.
families in the limelight, or they're in important roles or positions, or they're leaders of communities, and so it's
Hmm.
harder for them to share if they're having difficulty. I mean, I think that therapy is a little more less taboo at this point. We all can admit we have
Hmm.
problems.
Yeah.
But
It's getting there at least. Yeah.
I get it. Yeah, we're getting there. We're getting
Yeah,
there. But I wanted to ask you more in specifics to generational trauma, and that how that can influence family dynamics and even influence that anxiety or someone feeling triggered as well.
that's a really good question, and I'm so far from an expert on any of this as far as the kind of like the generational trauma and the DNA, but there is definitely
Right.
research to suggest that trauma in past generations can literally change the DNA, which gets transmitted to kids, grandkids, all of that. And so that is definitely something that uh, is at play. But I think even, you know, even if it's something traumatic that happens, or even more developmental trauma where there's just kind of ongoing neglect or ongoing unrealistic expectations, then if, say, it happened in your grandparents'
Mhm.
generation, and then obviously that generation was not as comfortable with therapy, or it wasn't as widely available, that kind of thing. And so they, the kids of that generation, which would be our parents, don't don't know how to process it. And so they've learned to do relationships based on their family. And so even if it has nothing to do with DNA or genetics, it's just these relational patterns that get passed on.
Yes, that can like almost like that conditioning or reactions. Like I always hear people or even say, breaking the pattern and breaking that generational pattern of abuse or neglect or
Mm-hmm.
we all have to be happy all the time, whatever that family dynamic is. And we know, I mean, you and I know that no family is perfect
Right.
in any way. And
Yeah.
when it comes to you had mentioned the word processing emotions or processing things that have happened. I would
Mm-hmm.
love to hear your definition, Sarah, on what processing means, because I feel like
Yeah.
the general population, we always say process your emotions, or we have to, and I feel like a
Hmm.
lot of people are like, yeah, I don't know what that means.
That's such a good point. I feel like a lot of times as mental health professionals, you use words and you think, oh, well, everybody knows what this is, but that's not
Yeah.
true. So that's a really good question. To me, processing, gosh, I think just means thinking about it, thinking
Yeah.
about how something affected you. I mean, I guess processing to the extreme degree would be going to therapy and dealing with it. However, that therapist does their job. But I
Sure.
think even just on your own is, you know, doing some journaling about it, and how did this make me feel? Again, what am I noticing?
Yeah.
Talking to somebody about it. I mean, somebody that
Sure.
is safe and trusted, somebody that is going to allow you space to talk and not either try to fix it or judge it or anything like that. That can also be very helpful.
Yes, that's really important. The not going to someone you're not going to go to your most judgmental friend to process your feelings.
Hopefully not, but that's understandable. You may not know, you're kind of operating on patterns, and
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah,
yeah.
you'll become more aware as you go though, as you're
Yes.
having these, and it sounds like, I mean, the theme in what I'm hearing with you, Sarah, is it sounds like a big part of, which I always say, it's like that awareness is so important in understanding what those emotions and feelings are in these situations, especially when you see, Uncle Joe and you're triggered, all of a
Right.
sudden, or you even, I mean, I even seeing, or I've heard even people seeing someone call them and they're all of a sudden getting this huge fight or flight response from someone calling them as well.
Hmm.
and being able to really ask yourself what is going on here. It seems like that is the first primal and most important thing to do, to understand, because we could guess all day long, but until, like you said, you're journaling, you're sitting with yourself, and then your truth can finally come through in that. I think that's really powerful.
And it's hard.
Yeah.
It's hard. Like, I don't think
Yes.
necessarily as a society, and I mean myself included, that we're always
Mm-hmm.
comfortable doing that.
No.
It's much easier to do a million other things, to be busy or watch something or scroll. Like, it's hard. It's really hard to sit with yourself.
Yes.
That's why I say it's very brave to attempt it, because it's not easy.
Absolutely. Yeah. Is that where you see a lot of, or notice a lot of this busyness culture happen sometimes, is where we're so fast paced, and that's another reason why we're not able to process and understand clearly on a deeper level what's happening?
I think it can definitely be a factor, depending on
Mm-hmm.
the person, of course. I think a lot of what I see is, yes, just staying very busy it kind of puts a protection around us that we don't have to necessarily think about difficult emotions or think about our
Yes.
family dynamics, which is not always fun. And but something else that I'm noticing recently is just this very high value on being productive. We have to
Mm.
be, and especially heading into the holiday season, it's like the busyness, and I mean, coming from a good place, whether you want to make things nice for your family or whether you just enjoy it yourself, it's very much having to do all the things, and that some of our worth, like how we feel about ourselves, comes from like how productive we can be as well.
That makes sense. That sounds like a pattern from is that patterns from childhood too as well?
Definitely. Yeah, yeah. A lot of times,
Yeah.
people that I see, their parents were very had high expectations, whether it be
Mm.
with school or sports or how they would contribute around the house. And definitely rest was not, or is not as valued.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. That makes sense. How can someone begin to redefine if they're starting to notice, wow, this is the role, like we know the peacemaker or the fixer or the,
Hmm.
the avoid, let me just go be the rebel, and some of
Yeah.
these roles, because we all take a role in life, but especially in a family dynamic, how can someone redefine and start that healing process in their role in their family, if they're not really sure where it's coming from? They just know that it's happening. They're able to identify the pattern, but they're like, I don't know why I'm like this. Do you see this a lot?
Yeah. Yeah. So you're asking kind of like, once they've identified it, once they see, then how do they start to change it?
Correct. Yes. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. That's very tough. I think, once you've done the work, and as the work, as far as like we've been saying over and over, like
Hmm.
paying attention to
Yes.
how things are affecting you, there may need to be some intentional time of just kind of sitting and reflecting. Is this something I actually like? Do I like to be around this person? Do I like to have this tradition? And like,
Yeah.
I think the tough thing is, if the answer is no, then what do you do about it? And
Yeah.
then that's when I think, gosh, the rubber really hits the road, as far as making choices to uh, kind of nurture your own peace, as opposed to
Yes.
making somebody else happy. It could be not traveling for the holidays, or it could be deciding to start your own traditions. Yeah, lots of different examples of things like that. But then I think, it gets tough, and then you're you're talking about literally changing neural pathways in your brain, and so it doesn't.
Right.
I think we want it to feel better, but it doesn't always feel better at first. It's kind of like you do it, you make a hard decision, and then you're like, oh, this holiday was so nice. I was just with my immediate family, or I just went to this
Right.
person's house, or I spent it with friends, or I
Ever
went to my own family's house and I kind of acted the way I wanted to, or I spoke up when I didn't used to.
That's such an
Yeah.
interesting, and that kind of leads into what I was going to ask you anyways, is really those boundaries. There's such a level, if we're one way for so long, you're right, it's the difficulty lies in that level of guilt of saying no to,
Hmm.
I'm not coming here for Christmas. It's almost like, have you seen that movie Four Christmases with like
Yes, it's been a while. Yes.
and they get caught going off to, like, I don't know, Hawaii or somewhere for a
Yes,
holiday,
yes,
and they
yes,
have
yes.
like zero guilt, and I feel like there's some people they would look at that and be like, I wish
Right.
I had this level of just
Yeah.
certainty in who I am. And but you're right, I mean, being able to make decisions for your own inner peace is so important. And I think that's why a lot of people have a difficulty going in that direction, because they
Hmm.
feel like where they're at right now, that difficulty is of dealing with that person, or that difficult person is easier than the difficulty of the guilt or the, I guess, I mean, in some cases, backlash. I'm not sure on that, but what
Hmm.
would you have to say if someone's experiencing that? I'm sure you've seen that quite a bit as well.
Yeah, definitely. And I think too, it's it's also the freedom to reassess every
Mm.
year. It's,
Okay. Yes.
if you're kind of right in the throes of thinking about all of this, and you're like, if I go and I do this thing, I'm not gonna make it, then it's okay to, I don't know, go on a cruise over the holidays
Yes.
or something like that. And then the next year, I mean, we're in a different place every year. And so it may be that the next year I feel like I could spend the time with these people. So I think it's just kind of tuning in to where we are. It's like one choice doesn't have to be the choice that you are going to make for the rest of your life. Because I feel like a lot of times when people are processing this, there's a pendulum where they swing to, I need to really, really, really protect myself. But then when they learn
Mm.
skills, boundaries, and all that, it's like, well, I can be with these people and do it in a way that feels honoring to myself.
Mm. Yeah,
So
I
it's
like that.
really, yeah, just being attuned with where you are each year.
That it doesn't have to be black and white. And if they feel confident
Right.
enough in those skills that you or anyone else helps them through, then they're able to do it next year, or do
Yeah.
a short, even a shorter, or maybe this year I don't stay in the home. Maybe I
Right.
stay in a spot nearby, and then I could
Right.
just have my breathing room if needed. And yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah,
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah. Yeah, it doesn't have to be all or nothing.
Yeah, that's
What
power.
I would
That's
want for a person is to ultimately be able to be in touch with what they need
mm,
and what would be best for them. Because I think that's something that, if you don't learn the skills as a child to figure out how to meet your needs, then to be able to do that as an adult and then to make decisions based on that is hard, but possible.
possible. Yes. And with parents more specifically, because this sparked in my mind, parents listening. Okay, this is verbatim what I've heard from clients in the past is, I don't want to
Yeah.
screw up my kids. I'm like, well, you're not going to screw up your kids. But how can parents be more in tune with their little ones, or maybe they're teenage? I know you have um, teenagers
Yes.
as
Yes.
well. Yeah, or
Hmm.
teenagers or young adults. How can, because it's never too late for even a parent to change with an adult, and maybe they were going through a very hard time when they were little, and now they're
Hmm.
reflecting and saying, wow, like I wish it could have been this or this or this. How would you say that they can navigate if they're either raising little ones in those like primal years
Hmm.
coming up, or even just kind of picking up right now from as young adults.
Yeah, I feel like that's an ongoing
That's a whole
something I'm
episode in
trying to learn.
itself.
But it is, yeah. And
Maybe we'll make another one.
I can speak mostly only from personal experience because I don't work with kids very often.
Mm,
So I mostly, when a child is young, they say that the biggest thing that you can do for them is what's called attunement. So just paying attention to them. We've been talking about paying attention to ourselves. And
right.
what's tough about this is that you have to be able to pay attention to yourself in order to be able to pay attention to them. But if you're noticing that they're feeling sad, or you're noticing even that they're feeling happy, just kind of coming in, holding space for that, which I realize is another kind of a therapy-ish type word, but just
Hmm.
just being with somebody when they feel a certain way, and not trying to fix it, not trying to make it better, just being with that person. I think that somebody gave me that advice, that I would sometimes want to overparent my kids so that they
Mm,
wouldn't feel unloved, or un you know and they wouldn't feel bad. And so I would
right.
somebody
Yeah.
gave me the advice, just to be with them, and don't try to.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, as parents, you have to instill certain things. You have safety values, that sort of thing. But as far as their emotional times when they're feeling a certain way, just to be with them. And
Yes.
that was really helpful for me.
And it takes the pressure off. It just reminds you that you don't have to be everything to,
Hmm.
to everyone. And especially with kids, I mean, that dynamic, I'm sure, is the most difficult to just be, and well, I say hold space too, but just be,
Yeah.
just to
Yeah.
be with them and help them understand and process, what it is they are feeling. And I know
Yeah.
schools, a lot of schools have started integrating this style of, understanding emotions more so.
Hmm.
But like you, I don't work with kids, so I don't I
Yeah.
don't know it
Yeah.
as much as, but it does make sense. And even if it's young adults, sounds like the same thing. All of us, sometimes we just want to be
Yeah.
heard. We don't want you to fix. So
Yes. Yeah. And I
it
and
makes
that's
sense.
very I think every parent probably has a different age where their kids can trigger them the most, but I think teenage
Mm,
years is definitely a time for that, because they start to move a little bit more away from their parents emotionally and move toward their
mm,
friends. And so it's very hard to know when to give them space and when to lean in and
yes,
try to forge that relationship, I guess, or navigate what it looks like as they get older.
as they get older. Do you help
Hmm.
people with that? Parents that are working with teen problems and teen stuff?
I help myself with that.
Well, if I ever have kids, then you'll be helping me with that.
I would do my best, but I mean, I do help people with that, but when it's your own situation, it's certainly very different. So having a kid
Yeah.
go to college this year and navigating what that relationship should look like, and then having a 15-year-old
Mm.
year old girl and navigating that is
Whew. Got your hands full.
learning alongside everybody else.
That's the cool thing, we're all learning together. So
Yes.
I think that's great.
Yeah.
Um, Yeah, I think this has been a great conversation, and there's been a lot of really good stuff come out of this. And I mean, kind of to recap everything we talked about, the biggest thing that I noticed and that stood out to me was the awareness and really taking that time to just pause and
Mm.
knowing that someone does have help or someone objective that they can talk to in any way, or even journaling if they want to process more internally on how they're feeling with these situations. And then also the other thing that stood out to me that you had mentioned was the black and white with the boundaries. It doesn't have to
Mm.
be, I'm fully cutting ties
Hmm.
with someone who's really not great to me, doesn't,
Right.
unless, they feel that that's a decision. And sometimes I'm sure, that is a decision
That is the
sometimes.
best in some situations.
Sometimes
Sure.
that
Yeah.
is the best and you have to honor that. And or
Hmm.
if it's more of a let me ebb and flow and kind of see how I feel from year to year, I think that's really helpful for people to know that, even, hey, I can keep space and not have a complete separate relationship from this person. I could just be there when I can be there for them
Yeah.
while still maintaining inner peace. That's really very helpful.
And I have seen clients do that beautifully, you know,
That's
having to
great. Yeah.
create a little space and then integrate back with their families, having their boundaries. It's not all families can do that, but
Yeah.
some can.
Some. Yeah,
Hmm.
and I think that's great. I mean, I think it's great that when you work with people and you help them build the skills to do that and then the confidence that they can do that, I'm sure that that makes a huge difference. Having like whatever those skills are for them is good stuff. Is there anything else that you want to add related to this topic that you feel is important?
That is a good question.
Doesn't have to be.
I'm trying to think of like of something that would be just like an easy first step if you're thinking
Oh,
about these things. I mean, maybe I can get back to you on that.
yeah, that's perfect.
This is I don't know about recommending like a specific one, but sometimes even like picking up a book, you could ask for recommendations and just kind of there is a book that I always recommend to clients when they're thinking about this. I don't know if it's okay for me to say what it
Yeah,
is.
please. I'd love for you to share it. Yeah.
Okay. It's called Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents.
Okay.
And
I have that
a
in my
lot.
office.
Oh, you do? Okay.
I do.
Well, I don't know. I don't know if you found this, but I mean, almost every client I recommend it to is thinks it's very, very helpful to think about the dynamics, what we've talked about with families. And so, if
Okay.
that might be something to pick up, if somebody's even kind of like, is this, am I crazy or is this really a thing? I feel like it's just validating to people.
That's great. So you said adult children of emotionally immature
Immature
parents.
parents.
And
Yeah, I'm
who's the
trying to remember.
author again of that? I'll put it in the show notes
Yeah,
anyways
put it in the notes.
as a
I
recommended
can't
read.
remember. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. That's great advice because they're able to really see the patterns and what's going on and then how they can tackle it from there. And then my
Hmm.
last question, which is the most important one to me, is if
Yes.
you were to get an all expenses paid trip to anywhere in the universe, real or fictional, where would you go and what's the first thing you would do?
I have one real and one fictional. Is that okay?
Go for both. Yes.
Okay. Fictional, I would go to Hogwarts. Yes.
Yes, me too.
I
You're
would
my
go to
best friend
Hogwarts.
now.
Love it. Love it. The first thing I would do, I was struggling with that one. I don't know if I would want, like be sorted into my house to know which house I was, or
Oh, cool.
just to eat dinner or go to, go to a class with Professor McGonagall. I don't know. Yeah. So that's my
What house do you think you are, if you were to guess?
That's a good one. On the tests, I've come out as a Gryffindor, but I don't know.
Mm,
I'm not sure. What about you?
Hufflepuff.
Okay, that would be my second.
Yeah, I
That
could
would be
see you
my
as
second one.
Gryffindor. Okay,
Well,
so clearly we need to start a Hogwarts Harry Potter podcast.
I
That's
could
great.
definitely be down with that.
And then what is your
And my
real option?
well, my real option is I've never been to England, but I
Okay.
love any kind of British. I love British murder mysteries. I love the Great British Baking Show. I love all of that. So I
Yeah,
just kind of like want to wander around the English countryside,
I love
and
that.
I want to go alone because I've never traveled alone, and I think that that would be something
That's
brave for me to
great.
do.
Well, and then when you go to England, you could just go to Hogwarts. So then you just, because Hogwarts
Exactly.
is real in my brain.
Me too. Me too. I was like, when are my
So,
kids going to get their letters?
oh, that's so funny.
Not
I love
not
that.
really, but yes.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
that's great. Well, Well, thank you so much, Sarah, for joining. I mean, this has been a great conversation, a great talk. And if someone, wants to reach out to you or wants to look into what you do a little bit more, what's the best way that they can find you?
Definitely my website. It's
Okay.
sarahpippincounseling.com. It's
Okay.
Pippin. And so there's
Okay.
information on there about how to get in touch with me. And if you just wanted to learn a little bit more about kind of how I do therapy, and there's an FAQ section and
Wonderful.
information like my email address, phone number, all of that.
That's great. And I'll put that in the show notes as well, just so they'll know how to find you and get in touch with any
Okay,
questions. Thank you so
great.
much for joining today. This has
Thank
been
you
a
so
great
much.
chat.
Thank you for
And
having me.
yes, of course. And of course we'll be on our trip to Hogwarts soon.
Can't wait.
Yeah. All right. Thanks so much. And thank you everyone for joining us. And we will see you next time in the next episode of The Awakened Mind.